Have you ever wondered why safe relationships can get boring quickly? I know he's nice, but he's just a little boring. He communicates and he respects me, but he's just a little boring. I don't know, Coach Racheal. Something is definitely missing in the bedroom. If you find safety in relationships boring or even triggering, then this video is for you. According to Scatter's two-factor theory of emotion, our body needs to get excited to feel emotions. But what we feel doesn't really matter as much as what we think led up to those feelings. What if I told you that there is a strategy to get over that feeling that you get when safe relationships become boring or even triggering? And this strategy can even work for you even if you just got out of a toxic relationship. In fact, there's an experiment. It was done on the Capilano Bridge here in Vancouver, where men were asked to participate in a survey about how scenery affects creativity. They were requested to create a short story about a picture of an ambiguous woman. The interviewer herself was very attractive and female as well. Get this. Some men were interviewed on a stable part of the bridge and some were interviewed on a not so stable part of the bridge. The men on the more stable part of the bridge told stories of more erotic imagery than the men on the stable part. So the study concluded that environment does directly influence the way we experience romantic connections. So I'm going to share with you a strategy that could help you overcome the fear of emotionally safe relationships. But first, what is emotional safety? If physical safety is your body being safe from physical harm, emotional safety is your inner world, your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, and your vulnerabilities. It's those things being treated with respect and care. If you continue your journey with us, you'll hear me talk a lot about conflict resolution, or as I like to call it, repair, and how it can only be done in a place where emotional safety is present. But simply put, emotional safety creates a space for vulnerability, it creates a space for trust, and it creates a space for connection. Before I understood the difference between emotional safety and perceived safety, I struggled with feelings of self-sabotage. Even though I had a good time on a date, I would have to fight the feelings that came after that just to sabotage it, to end it before he manipulated, to end it before he lied, or to end it before he cheated. I had to learn how to differentiate between perceived safety and emotional safety. I had to learn that it was a choice to do the consistent actions to ensure emotional safety in a relationship. I was my first support system. I was my first friend, and I was my first safe space. For those that continue education with us, I talk a lot about the difference between a trauma bond and a healthy relationship. But simply put, in this step, you have to let logic drive and emotions take the back seat. Now that we know what emotional safety is and why it's so important, how can you regulate your emotions so that safety in a relationship is not triggering? Let's talk about how you can do that, okay? So there are 3 steps to emotionally regulate so you can stop feeling triggered, stop feeling the need to sabotage any relationship. So step 1, mark the moment. This simply means, how is the trigger showing up for you? For some people, is it a physical response of an anxiety attack, or is it a headache? Or are you actually starting to get attracted to somebody else? Before I understood what triggers are, and before I understood that they're just symptoms, before I took the time to get to the bottom of why I needed to know exactly where the exit was in every relationship, I struggled with anxiety that comes with getting close to new people, whether it was a friendship or a romantic relationship. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had to learn that not everybody was out to get me. I had to learn that just because someone was interested or getting close to me, it did not mean that they had bad intentions. I had to learn that it was okay to try again. I was my first friend, I was my first cheerleader, and I was my first safe space. See, that Racheal in the past was so triggered and so uncomfortable around new people all the time. That Racheal, she didn't have the skills to regulate. She did not have any control. Remember how I talked about putting logic in the driving seat and letting emotions take the back seat? I had to learn how to recognize a trigger before it took over and turned into a full-blown anxiety attack. I had to be my first friend, I had to be my first cheerleader, and I had to be my first coach. Now, going back to the Capilano Bridge experiment, the subjects in this experiment are male. They had a behavior change because of the environment that changed. Participants in the unstable part of the bridge had a more erotic description when it came to the story that they made up about the picture, while participants on the more stable part of the bridge came up with a less erotic description. We cannot control the environment. We cannot control time. We cannot control space. However, what can we control? I think this is a good segue to go into our step 2. Fear versus fact. Basically, this is the ability to differentiate between a trauma response and intuition. Before I was a coach, before I was a support system, before I understood how much emotional regulation could change my view on relationships, I did not know that I could trust myself again. I would get so paralyzed by anxiety. It didn't take much for me to get triggered. Sometimes it was just a social media post. Sometimes it was someone at the gym. And for a long time, I just felt like I was hypersensitive to everything. I had to learn the difference between what fear was and what was a fact. I had to fall in love with the imperfect part of myself. And most of all, I had to forgive myself for not knowing any better at the time I got hurt. I was my first true companion. I was my first place of safety, and I was my first friend. See that Racheal in the past? She looked for patterns in behavior. No. That Racheal was so scared to feel because everything was so overwhelming and scary. That Racheal was too impatient to take a moment and think, wait, is this based on my past relationship or what is happening today in the current situation? I had to learn how to trust myself again. I had to learn how to fall in love with the aha moment of the day where I am actually focusing on progress, not perfection. I had to learn how to extend some grace. The grace that I have for everybody else, I had to learn how to extend it to myself. I had to be my first support system. I had to be my first confidence coach, and I had to be my first friend. The practice of fear versus fact is solely focused around giving yourself grace. The same grace we so easily extend to people in our lives, we have to extend to ourselves. I remember having to constantly remind myself that I did not expect people around me to be perfect. Why was I so hard on myself? Which brings me to step 3. Ground and then go. After extending grace to yourself, let logic drive. Put the emotions in the back seat for a while. For those continuing their healing journey with us, you'll hear me talk a lot about emotional safety and how emotional safety itself can be the activation point for an old wound that hasn't healed. But simply put, sometimes even genuine intentions, even genuine people, genuine connections can be hard to accept without suspicion. So in the ground, then go step, we definitely have to build the habit of constantly checking in, constantly asking yourself, is this reaction based on something my partner is doing right now, or is it based on a past event? Before as a coach, before as a support system, before I read the book, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, I struggled with performance anxiety and perfectionism. I was constantly running from connection because connection meant pain. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had to learn that I could be in control of my emotions. Or better yet, I can control the people I let into my life. I had to learn that I was the magic. I was my first friend, I was my first coach, and I was my first support system. So if you're wondering, how do I deal with triggers associated with getting back into the dating pool? Then this is your answer. If this video has been helpful, subscribe for more. I'm Coach Racheal, and I can't wait to connect with you again. I'll see you soon.